Do come in. We want you to come in. If you are interested, do head for the chairs. We'll keep the doors open for just a second, so come on in if you would like to. Right. I think we're almost there. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are in our tour of the world and its new powerful economies. We're alighting upon India right now. Same format. We've got two splendid panel members who I'll introduce in just a moment, and then we're going to have a sort of market report, an overview, and I'll introduce that right afterwards. But first, give a very warm welcome, if you would, to our two panel members. Ashwini Kakar from Mercury Travels, and just beyond him, thank you for the enthusiastic applause, but let's give them both a round at once. Yashraj Jain, who's from Indian Compass. So welcome to you both. Thank you for coming up. So we'll hear from Ashwini and from Yashraj in just a moment, but before we do, let's get the overview of the Indian market from Peter Nash, who's Strategy Manager for Tourism Ireland. And Peter, take it away.
Thanks very much. Delighted to be here. So in terms of talking about the powerhouse economy that is India, and I'll be brief in terms of setting the context, really I'd just like to talk to you about the fact that the population growth in India, which has been spectacular, is actually slowing a bit at the moment. And the population is aging somewhat, and we'll see what implications that has for the tourist economy. In terms of the economy, again, the economy is slowing somewhat in recent times, and with inflation a bit of an issue, and we'll look at the impact of that on the outbound market as well. And then turning to the outbound market itself, it's been a very fast-growing market, and it's quite a competitive market, and I think the presence of so many NTOs, National Tourist Organisations in India, has helped drive that competition to some extent. And finally, in terms of air connectivity and access, India really led the world in terms of promoting the notion of open skies, but the skies actually to Europe at this stage are not quite as crowded as they used to be. So in terms of the population, it has the world's second largest population, and that growth is moderating, as you can see from this chart here. However, even though it is moderating, actually a growth of 1% in the Indian population equates to a million extra consumers in India. So we needn't worry unduly about the fact that growth is moderating. And of course, one of the implications of that growth, really from our point of view, is that actually the middle class is enormous in India, and it's now the fastest growing middle class in the world. And obviously in terms of long-haul tourism that we in Europe are interested in, it's the growth of that middle class that's particularly important. You can see here I'm taking to some extent tertiary education as a sort of as an indicator of the middle classness of these economies, and you can see that over time the Indian middle class is growing enormously. So if we think about the key things in terms of the population of India, it's becoming more middle class, which is actually more important than the fact that it's becoming more middle-aged. We have about 50 million middle-class consumers in India, and about 30 million of those hold passports. So clearly that's good in terms of the available pool for us to draw from. And I think even though the population growth may be slowing, that middle class, given all the other indicators and our understanding of the Indian economy and the Indian market, that middle class from our point of view in terms of the sort of planning process we're involved in, that middle class will continue to grow for what we could describe as the foreseeable future. Turning then to the economy, obviously per capita GDP in Britain is still low by Western and I guess by the powerhouse economy standards. I mean, to some extent, part of the reason why we think so much about India is it's actually got to do more with its scale than its wealth. So its actual per capita GDP is still quite low. However, it's actually growing extremely rapidly. So it has been growing very rapidly, and it's set to continue to grow very rapidly in the period up to the middle of this decade. So we can see that in terms of that BRIC powerhouse economy grouping, we're doing quite well in India, just behind China. Now, more recently, that growth has not been quite as stable or as steady as it has been in some of the more explosive powerhouse economies. However, we shouldn't allow this instability in growth in India to deflect from the fact that even in a bad year, India is still growing very, very strongly based on these projections from Oxford Economics. And I guess from our point of view, in terms of the category that we're interested in, namely travel and tourism, the good news is that growth is actually, that growth is being translated into increased consumer spending. So the growth may be a little staccato, but the growth is translating nicely into consumer spending. For India as an economy, and for us as people involved in travel and tourism, one of the big longer term problems is actually inflation. Inflation is an issue in many countries. In India, recent inflation has been very, very high. And the reason why I'm concerned about inflation in India is that it undermines people's confidence to some extent. So high inflation economies tend to be economies in which the middle class are a bit uneasy about their futures. The slight economic slowdown won't necessarily impact the class of people that we're particularly interested in attracting to Europe. But of course, inflation can destroy everybody's wealth. So inflation is an issue. The Indian currency, in terms of the outbound market, the Indian currency hasn't been particularly strong either, which of course is another economic worry for us. So the economy may be slowing somewhat. The bigger issue for us, I think, is that inflation is accelerating. Most indicators are set for growth in the medium to long term. The issue with per capita GDP is that I think it's the Boston Consulting Group say that if you haven't got GDP per capita at about $9,000, you're unlikely to develop a big long-haul travel market. And of course, as we saw, the per capita GDP as well in India as well below that. I think in the medium term, there are a number of what we might call infrastructural and regulatory bottlenecks in India, which are contributing both to the inflation I observed and also perhaps eroding some confidence amongst that group of people that we would be most likely to attract to Europe. And to some extent, you could say the things that have made India the success that it is, their ability to work together, across an enormous country, perhaps also are things which will impede its development in the future. So in terms of turning to the outbound market, India outbound to the world predictably has grown quite strongly in recent years as we have seen that massive development and expansion of the Indian economy. We can see, for example, that the downturn experienced in outbound from India at the time of the Great Recession is much, much less more modest than the downturn we saw in many more developed economies. So that just really shows you the underlying strength of the economy, notwithstanding the caveats I mentioned earlier. And of course, Europe has shared in this outbound growth. In line with the comments about the other powerhouse economies, the fact is, of course, that our share of outbound has declined over the recent years. And our share of, and clearly this chart is done on two different axes. Our share, namely Europe's share of outbound, has fallen from about 19% to about 14%. So reminiscent of the numbers mentioned for China earlier. In terms of the specifics of the outbound to Europe, you can see here the strong countries in Europe in terms of attracting outbound visitors from India. You can see the UK doing very strongly, France and Italy doing strongly. The UK obviously has the historic colonial links, if you want to call it that, and obviously to a high degree the shared language, which we know is important for visitors generally. France and Italy, because they obviously are the cultural highlights of Europe and clearly would expect to do well in terms of their share of any developing market. I guess the one that's slightly intriguing really is Switzerland. Switzerland has done very well from India, and as I work for a national tourist board, I like to feel that it's because the Swiss National Tourist Board very cleverly targeted India and latched onto some very specific promotional devices, in particular the creating linkages with the wider Bollywood industry, so that if you ask a lot of Indian people now to describe Europe in the round, they will tend to give you a description that we would recognize immediately as Switzerland, namely black and white cows with bells frolicking on an alpine meadow with a snow-covered peak in the background. So you can see it's growing quite strongly, and these are the countries that are benefiting particularly from that. So in terms of what does all this mean for us, in terms of considering India as a powerhouse economy, outbound has grown quickly. Outbound to Europe continues to grow quite well. Our share predictably is declining. In terms of the actual quantum of people that might be available to come to Europe, our colleagues in tourism economics would suggest that we will have about 2 million visitors to Europe from India in 2015. Switzerland remains the role model for NTOs, and of course if you look at NTOs, National Tourist Organizations in India, there has been an absolute explosion of entrance into India in the last couple of years, at approximately 5 to 10 new NTOs opening offices in India every year. Very quickly, just in terms of air connectivity with Europe, outbound air departures from India continue to grow. However, air capacity to Europe is easing back somewhat. India embraced the open skies movement very early on, and there was a massive development of outbound generally, of access and air connectivity generally. At one time there were up to 20 airlines flying direct services to Europe. However, in the most recent period we've seen some easing back in that, in the sense that perhaps there was an over-expansion of connectivity with Europe following the open skies arrangements. And at the moment we're looking at about 70,000 average weekly capacity in terms of seats in each direction. So the key points I'd make there really would be the deregulation of Indian airspace has favoured more scheduled carriers than charters. We've seen a big expansion in services. In terms of the key players on the market, on the routes, it's Lufthansa, Air India and Jet Airways. So thanks very much. That's really the key points I'd like to make in relation to the development of the Indian market.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Peter. And do join us. Right, Ashwin, I want to start with you. I just want to get a clearer sense, perhaps, of the mentality of Indian travellers. It was very striking to me that in China, for all of the numbers that now do travel long haul, 70% of Chinese outbound travel is still within Asia, and much of it relatively local to Hong Kong, Macau, etc. If we're down to 14% share of Indian outbound travel, where are most Indians looking naturally as their first sort of port of call for foreign travel?
Well, let me just start by putting all this in the larger context a little bit. Just a couple of trends that we are witnessing. One, the big trend in India, like in the rest of the world, is a huge polarization of customers into the cash-rich, time-poor customers and the time-rich, cash-poor customers. And this is a very visible trend and has huge bearing on some of the facts that were stated in the report. For example, if you talk of per capita GDP, I mean, yes, the per capita GDP may be, say, $5,000 or whatever, but the crucial, or less even, but the crucial point is when you have 1.2 billion people and you have 200 and odd million people who are, champing at the bit for becoming the middle class, and you have more people in India speaking English than the entire population of the United States of America, then I think that puts things in a little bit better perspective as well. On the other hand, the big trend that we are also noticing because of the problems in the global economy is this new trend which I call closer, shorter, cheaper, later. Travel customers are traveling closer, they're traveling, shorter distances, they're staying shorter periods of time, they're booking later, and so on and so forth.
So where are most Indians going?
As for most travel, obviously about 60% of Indians are traveling short haul, and the big countries in the short haul area are Singapore, Dubai, Malaysia, Thailand, and so on and so forth. But this is a global phenomenon. At a global aggregation level, 70% of all travelers in any case travel short haul. People from the United Kingdom going to Canary Islands or other places or XYZ and so on and so forth.
But it's important, if you're trying to break into this market in a bigger way, to know what your competitors, what you're up against, basically. So in essence, if Europe wants to attract a higher degree of the Indian outbound travelers, they're going to have to persuade Indians maybe that idea of going to Singapore or to Dubai should be put on the back burner, or if they've done it before, you shouldn't do it again. You should come to Europe now.
Well, that's what's happening. At the second level, second time round, or, when they come in with, one country kind of thing, then they're traveling more to Europe, because Europe has huge amounts to offer, including the United Kingdom.
But Europe has hassle too, doesn't it? I mean, Yashraj, let me bring you in. You can't get around discussing visas in most of these emerging marketplaces. In India, coming to Europe, maybe the US as well. I don't know what the situation is with the US, but how big an obstacle or a mental sort of issue for Indians is the visa situation?
Well, just give you a background from where I come, and all of this data that we've collected on our website is called Indian Compass, and we're an online guidebook for Indians traveling to Europe. And not surprisingly, the maximum amount of comments, the maximum amount of clicks, readership reviews are on all those articles which are related to the magic four-letter word, visas. Because everyone wants to get a way out of how to make that entire journey as easy as possible. We did a short piece of secondary research sitting in London trying to see if the Indian diaspora in the UK can apply for visas to go to Europe, because it's just a short-haul flight like our colleague mentioned, and most of them are on resident visas who will still need a Schengen visa to go. But it's alarming that the entire mechanism of how these embassies are communicating all these rules to applicants is so flawed that one embassy will ask you for N number of papers, which is completely different to the other embassy. And if you dig in further, the bigger picture is that the visa code is a common code that every embassy should apply. So in the execution of that visa code, the amount of different versions that have come up is the biggest obstacle from our side. Like, I've traveled to Europe 4 times a year applying for separate Schengen visas, and I'm okay to do that because I am travel hungry. I like traveling. But the fact is that my journey is not made any more comfortable because of the way these websites are written, the way the rules are coming out.
And that's just the complexities of the system and the rules. But I also wonder whether Indians, and I'd like both of your feedback on this, whether they just feel a little alienated by an attitude problem, that too many systems, too many bureaucrats, too many officials in different European countries seem to Indian people to regard them as, potential illegal immigrants or a potential problem rather than a potential opportunity and great valued customers.
Maybe sitting on this side of the table, we might think that way, but for a normal consumer who wants to travel and is going on a website to apply, I don't think that's what comes across to them. They just get frustrated that why are there so many other countries which have visa on arrivals and are easy to enter, whereas Europe, or the Schengen states for that matter, have these 20-odd things that we need to finish before we can even think of buying our ticket or planning our trip abroad halfway around the world. So maybe from our side of view, obviously, when you speak to the politicians, when you speak to other trade organizations, the reason that there are so many sort of barriers for people to apply is because they don't want illegal immigrants and they don't want people just sort of shooting into Europe. But I think from a normal traveler who wants to travel alone, like the case was in Brazil as well, a lot of young travelers want to take backpacking trips to a different country on their own. It's a big deterrent at that point.
See, the visas themselves are broken up into 3 parts. The first part is for a 15-day visa to the United Kingdom, if it's going to cost you 50 quid, you're already set back a little bit. The other issue, the other big issue is time. How long does it take? It can take 6 weeks, it can take 8 weeks, it can take 4 weeks, you know. And
so you can't be an impulse holiday maker.
Exactly. And even if you apply, you know, 4 weeks before you actually travel, you're not sure whether you're going to get your, your visa in time. And if you do get your visa in time, by that time the seats have disappeared. So, you know, or you're having to pay 3 times the price on the seats. So, you know, it's a no-win situation. And the third part relates to the complexity, because, you know, like he said, every country is starting to have their own interpretation of the rule, and the Schengen countries are starting to put in, digitized fingerprinting. And for the digitized fingerprinting, you have to come to a large city where they have their operations. So, and India being a country which is 3,500 kilometers east to west and 3,200 kilometers north to east, you know, if you're coming, if you're a doctor leaving your practice and coming to Mumbai to give your fingerprints on that damn machine, you know, you're already dead on arrival.
I think I'm heading to Dubai.
Exactly. I mean, other countries don't require a visa at all. And they're saying, hey, please come, we'll welcome you. You know, you don't need a visa. Yeah. If you at all need a visa, we'll give you one on arrival. So, you know, and it's such a welcoming attitude.
Well,
but visa is only one part of the whole big problem. So visas is one problem, but there's other problems, you know, connectivity. I think, you know, if a lot of these countries want better traffic to flow from India, they've got to invest in connectivity.
What you mean Airlinks?
Airlinks, for example. I mean, most airlines out of India today are running at 85-90% seat load factors, and so there's no more connectivity available. And because of that, the prices are so high. Right. I mean, if I come to London, I'm paying 1,100, 1,200 pounds for an economy class seat, and about 3 times that price for a business class seat.
India, you know, was one of the great homes for budget airline innovation.
Absolutely.
But budget, there isn't really a budget option of getting to Europe. Then?
I think you know, especially the United Kingdom has the greatest possibility of getting a few million visitors every year from India, especially because of the past links, especially because of the language proficiency and things like that.
And the presence of a huge number of, you know,
visiting friends and relatives and things
Indian sort of
diaspora,
heritage people in this country.
Absolutely.
Which means, you know, if nothing other than for family visits and everything else, there's a huge Indian population there that has links to the UK already.
And exactly, the third leg, you know, visas is one, connectivity is the other, and the third leg is communication. You know, there's absolutely no communication in those markets you know, some countries have done it a lot better than, let's say, the United Kingdom. But, you know, the United Kingdom could have also put in more effort, more resources. Right. When there are 45 national tourism organizations competing for the Indian traveler, then, you know, obviously if the UK spends some money and put in some effort, the results would be, you know, disproportionate.
Well, we know from Peter, Switzerland's done a damn fine job.
Absolutely.
You two, from your different perspectives on the Indian travel industry, who else is understanding the Indian market and doing well?
A lot of people wish to travel to Spain of late, but the reason again for that is the Indian film industry, because other states and other tourism boards are partnering with the big industry of entertainment in India and trying to pitch in their destinations to the audience, because that's...
We in Britain had the Bollywood big Oscar night in Sheffield. Didn't that give us a big boost?
But Britain's always been on their radar, like Mr. Ashwini's also mentioned.
Mr. Ashwini's saying Britain's missing loads of opportunities.
And a lot of times the readers that we come across are either going only to Europe or UK, because when they go to Europe, they've just got that one cost for one visa to 27 countries. But to apply for a second visa and to do all that paperwork, fees, etc., all over again is another sort of decision-making activity. Right. So either they come just to the UK or just Europe. Peter, some of them who have the strength will do both.
Yeah, you've obviously spent time looking at the Indian market. I mean, you particularly presumably want them to come to Ireland, but where do you see the best operation, you know, from a European perspective? Is it just about Switzerland? Where else would you see that they have a really good understanding of the Indian market and are doing the right things?
Well, from my point of view, I think what's attractive is that the Swiss have shown that if you apply kind of a marketing approach and a marketing logic and identify what's important to Indian visitors, you can really revolutionize your visits from India.
Right.
So, but I think other people are copying onto that now. So Austria, for example, is replicating the
Well, they're lucky because they look a bit like Switzerland, so they can sort of
perhaps,
pretend to be Switzerland too.
But perhaps there's an opportunity now for a destination to come in with a slightly different approach.
But when you look at the Indian market, we heard a lot when we discussed China about frankly the conservatism of a lot of Chinese travellers. I didn't mean to be judgmental, but they want, pretty consistent Chinese food to be led, by thoroughly Mandarin-speaking Chinese guides and dealt with in a thoroughly Chinese way. Is the Indian traveller looking for a somewhat different experience? How would you...
See, we are extremely lucky actually, because kebabs and curries are the national food of England. So, there's already a great start. And we don't have to kind of worry about whether we'll get kebabs or curries or whatever. There is a small segment of the population, let's say 1 in 3 or something like that, who like vegetarian food, and that's also becoming more and more easily available throughout the United Kingdom. So technically I'd say that's a huge opportunity. I mean, like the Chinese, Indians also love to shop, and for similar reasons. So that's another big area where, the economy of the United Kingdom or the whole of Europe could probably benefit from the Indian traveler into this market. And Indians are fairly big spenders.
What kind of shopping? Is it the same? The love of labels and, high-end retail?
Not really. It's less of that and more of, local produce, local kind of, let's say, things which are...
sort of authentic.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Indians are much more fond of, monuments and historic visits and museums and things like that. And Indians, unlike the Chinese, will travel in families. They won't travel in... yes, there is a certain... The first-timers are always traveling, in GITs, group tours and things like that. But they are going mainly to Europe and doing 10 countries like the Chinese. But that's really 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 travelers. The bulk of the people are coming in families. They're spending most of their time in either 1 or maximum 2 countries. They're spending about $1,800 in country on average. And they're spending between 14 to 21 days at a time. So, because these are long haul markets, once they come, they want to... and they're not scared of going out and talking to the local people. They're spending time with the local populace. They're building bridges because they speak good English.
Sure.
So that makes life a lot easier for the Indians.
Yes.
But I think in addition to that, generally speaking, because of their history and because of their propensity to work abroad and to study abroad, the opportunity from India is enormous because of their openness to traveling, to coming to Europe and traveling around Europe.
Also going back to the aspect about food habits, and it just triggered when you asked the question about what does an Indian traveler want. I think it's very important for us to keep reminding ourselves that when you're trying to sell a continent like Europe to India, that is a subcontinent in itself. So it's literally 26 countries trying to sell yourself to 26 other smaller countries within one big geographical area. And a lot of times some of our readers who are coming from these specific states of India, traveling in groups, are from the same community. They're the ones who speak the same language, the same food habits. So it would be completely wrong to just decide and say, let's give them vegetarian food because they're Indians. You've got to do some more background search on what your group is all about and which part of India they're coming from, and then try and serve them accordingly. A lot of Indians would like to experiment with food, but are very religious, and you cannot get yourself wrong on that front. You can't serve them a pizza with bacon, and when they tell you, I don't eat meat, pick off the pieces of bacon and give them the same pizza again. That's not going to work. But they would still like to interact and eat the local food. So Italian food or Greek food, for that example, fits in very well with vegetarian food. So it's just to let them know that we are making the effort to make sure you taste our exotic food, but to your dietary requirements. And that will leave an impression. Word of mouth will happen once they go back home, and you'll get repeat visitors. The only thing with shopping, I think, is the Indian customer is very, very price sensitive. So a discount or an offer or a specific brand doing a mass campaign in a metropolitan city in Mumbai for a specific Christmas fair or a market, you will get those travelers all the way from India.
And a final thought, and then I'm going to just see if there are questions on the floor, but a final thought. It's been mentioned several times, Europe's and the UK, let's face it in particular, has got a particular relationship with India because there are very large Indian communities living in situ. Is that being exploited in the right way, do you think, in terms of encouraging Indians to come? I mean, would Indians like to, frankly, as part of a tour of the UK, would they like to spend more time in cities that have a very strong Indian connection, whether it be Bradford or, some of the other cities that have a big Indian community? Should that be part of the sales pitch?
Actually, that completely should be the part of the sales pitch, and that's what our website actually has realized, and that's what we do. We try and find the bits of India that are left all around Europe, whether it's that movie that's shot over there, or whether it's that cafe where our ex-prime minister met his to-be wife, or whether it's that church where some ex-person got married.
And that really works, does it?
Yeah, that works. Like when we went to Geneva myself, we went to the CERN laboratories and went to the museum there. But when you tell those Indians that 20 other sort of, astronauts from the Indian ISRO organization are contributing to making this machine work, etc., that gives them a sense of pride that something's happening in Europe thanks to my country. So if we package our tours and we get our tour guides to convey all of that information to Indians traveling here, is going to make a big impact. It's not like they're going to enjoy a World War memorial, not because it's not significant, but not a lot of them have those connections with the World War or the bigger historic events that have happened in Europe.
Yeah.
See, there's another little element that I'd like to bring in, and that is the concept of the non-resident Indians. And there's about 30 million of these non-resident Indians because India has been the largest supplier of doctors, scientists and engineers to the world. And these non-resident Indians are a fairly wealthy lot. If you were to put them together, their GDP would be equal to the 8th largest country in the world. And there is an interesting way of attracting these people as well. I'm saying there is an India within India and there's an India outside of India, and attracting all these Indians is probably really worthwhile and could yield wonderful results for the whole of Europe. But all Indians within or outside of India or whatever, are value for money seekers. And so whether it's buying the airline seat or the hotel or doing shopping or whatever, they will look for the best value for money. And I think that needs to be borne in mind. And if that can be achieved, I think you'll have a great amount of success.
Powerful message, Ashwini. We are unfortunately running a little bit late. I'll just see if there's anybody who can very quickly make a contribution. Anybody who wants to ask India-related questions. Sir, go on.
Using one word, India, to describe the entire geopolitical group, don't you think that's misleading? Because you are looking at a conglomeration of different values and different languages. So will it be will it be an overgeneralization for you to just typify an Indian customer or guest or visitor?
While there are a lot of dissimilarities, there's also a lot of similarities. The common English language, for example, spoken by almost half the country is a big binding force. Similarly, there are a lot of past history, all kinds of things are also a binding force. So I think it is one country as it stands today, and therefore it's not that dissimilar as, say, a Portugal or a Germany would be from England, because most language and other religious, for example, Hindus constitute maybe about 80% of the population, so there's common religion by and large, even though it's the country with the maximum number of religions that coexist. There's about 15 diverse religions that coexist. But on the other hand, so there's dissimilarities and similarities. But I think if you're addressing the market as a consumer market, then it's good to address it as one consumer market.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Right. This will have to be the last one. Go on, sir.
Hi, just very quickly. My name's Tim Fairhurst from ETOA. Can't help noticing that this is the third presentation where people have been mentioning the value or the appeal of Europe for potential students, and that this correlates quite tightly with the growing middle class, people who have the money and the interest in sending their children abroad and supporting them in that. So I just wonder to ask the panel and the room generally if they think that expediting or really focusing on student visas is a strategic opportunity for tourism, both because the students themselves may later become travellers and influential in their peer group, but obviously they'll be an attraction for their friends and family for the period of time they are abroad.
Yeah, does that excite you, the potential of students?
It does, and the whole fact that you mentioned that when students come, most of them come for the undergraduate or master's degrees, are within the vicinity of the continent, but the fact is they still have an Indian passport. And all of that comes down to the visa process, because even though it's a 2-hour flight ticket to Switzerland from London, they've still got to go through the entire same process that they would have done back home. Secondly, a lot of student visa rules are changing, say for example in the UK, and when a lot of students do come to the UK, they would want to get that ROI back of whatever they are spending in the country by working for a year or two, which is not an option anymore for a lot of students.
So it's getting much tougher.
The PSW, yeah, so it's getting much tough. The student population might be dwindling in the coming years.
Right.
And so it's all about how tourism boards can now try and market the people who are already hiding within these pockets of Europe, but with Indian passports, and trying to make them travel.
It is about the lifetime value of the customer as well. They come
It's
as a
long-term
student,
strategic
They
thinking.
may come back, they say good things about us when they go back to India. Some of their family may visit them when they're here.
Sure.
So they're a rich and interesting segment.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there, panel, or else we're going to terribly overrun. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very, very grateful, warm hand to our India panel. Thank you very much. Thank you. And next, ladies and gentlemen, Russia. So 2 minutes only, and then we're into Russia. Thank you.